Good afternoon. I'm Lindsey Reiser, and we have breaking news from Washington. The Justice Department is indicting former FBI Director James Comey for a second time. Sources tell CBS News the charges are in connection to a social media post he put up last year that had 8647 written in seashells along the beach. 86 is a slang term commonly used to get rid of something, and Trump is the 47th president. Comey previously led the Federal Bureau of Investigations before being fired during the first Trump administration. Back in September, the DOJ brought charges against the former FBI director, accusing him of lying to Congress about leaking information to the press. But that case was ultimately dismissed. Comey fell out of favor with the president ahead of his first term in office for investigating the incoming president and his ties to Russia. Since his dismissal, Comey has been an outspoken critic of the administration. Let's bring in CBS News Department of Justice reporter Jake Rosen. So, Jake, what more do we know about this? Because I remember when this happened, I believe it was around summertime last year. He said he took it down immediately because he didn't know that it meant what people were accusing him of.
That's exactly right. And in the aftermath of that, we reported at the time last May, about a year ago, Lindsey, that Comey met with Secret Service investigators in Washington, D.C. For a matter of hours, where he discussed the post after President Trump called attention to it and said that Comey should be put under investigation. Now, we don't know the specific charges. It's certainly possible there could be some charge related to an interstate threat against a public official like President Trump, although the language in that post of the 8647 is, while it's rather specific when you put it in the context, could be perceived as rather vague in a court of law. We've reached out to Comey's team for a reaction, have not got one yet, but multiple sources have told us that this indictment did happen in North Carolina in federal court. We're waiting for official court documents, of which we also have not seen any yet be published publicly.
Are we expecting any kind of statement from the DOJ or from Comey himself?
It's certainly possible. We saw former FBI Director James Comey react on his Substack and social media pages when the initial indictment against him came down. And as legal developments came down, that all ended up kind of snowballing and siding with him and Letitia James as they both moved together to dismiss the initial set of indictments against them brought by this Department of Justice. This is part of a renewed effort by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to reinvigorate the Justice Department to do what President Trump directed them to do at the beginning of his administration, which is to go after perceived enemies of the president. James Comey is certainly at the top of that list, as he was not only one of the first people to be indicted by this Justice Department, who's a political opponent of President Trump, but also we knew that there are repeated and ongoing investigations in other districts, like the Southern District of Florida, into Comey and other intelligence officials as well. There is a press conference later today at the Department of Justice, although we have not quite yet nailed down, Lindsey, that press conference is related to this, although certainly we'll find out more about that as we get an opportunity to.
Do you imagine that the indictment is going to mention at least the first two attempted assassinations on President Trump, even though both of them happened well before this post was made?
It's certainly possible, Lindsey, and I think it comes as we saw the Department of Justice yesterday, and Kash Patel, U.S. Attorney here in D.C., Jeanine Pirro, and Acting Attorney General Blanche reaffirmed that any threats against the president would be taken seriously. It's within a political vacuum in which the Trump administration is still appealing, and this Department of Justice is still appealing the decision late last year to strike down the initial indictment against James Comey. That legal battle was prolonged and has really sided in a one-side manner against the Department of Justice. Not only did the Department of Justice improperly appoint the federal prosecutor that brought those charges, Lindsey, but also there were a number of motions singling out a selective and vindictive prosecution against James Comey because he's been one of the most outspoken former Trump administration officials from the first Trump administration to continue his criticism of the president. There will be a very similar set of motions to try and dismiss these charges almost certainly and likely almost immediately in these cases, like we saw the first time around. Again, once we find out more specifics about what these charges are, there's potentially other ways to do this too, because if it's just simply this post and having seen James Comey apologize for it, already talked to investigators last year, what, Lindsey, led to this specific charge being brought now outside of what we saw over the weekend at the White House Correspondents' Dinner remains to be seen.
So let's talk about that other charge again that was dismissed, this lying to Congress over alleged leaks to the press. So you mentioned that it was tossed out because not only was the prosecutor found to have been illegally appointed, but also it was the judge viewed it as selective and vindictive prosecution, if I'm hearing you correctly. Does that preclude the federal government from bringing that particular case again before a grand jury for a possible indictment?
That specific case is currently on appeal, and it's just, Lindsey, on the appointment of that federal prosecutor, Lindsey Halligan, that White House aide turned U.S. attorney for a temporary amount of time, where she brought charges against Comey and Letitia James. There's arguments set for that in the next couple of months, and likely no resolution to that until later this summer. In the meanwhile, we know that there are at least 2 other investigations into Comey, part of which is related to this 8647 post, which we should remind our viewers is just the 86 in a diner or informal slang, meaning to potentially kill a menu item or get rid of something, and 47 with President Trump being the 47th president. We should also note that there's an ongoing investigation led by a longtime Trump ally in the Southern District of Florida against people like John Brennan, against people like potentially James Comey, for intelligence that they had going into the 2016 election that President Trump might be aligned with Russia in some form or sense. That James Comey has been at the center of so many different things that have frankly peeved the president since he was a candidate the first time. And because he's continued to be outspoken, at least Comey's attorney said in numerous court filings in the last case, that's why they believe that he is a victim of this Department of Justice, and the ongoing now 2 indictments against him. We'll certainly find out more once charges are filed on the docket and we can get a chance to read through them of how concrete they are and whether it's more than just potentially this one charge for the social media post.
Can you remind us why there's bad blood between Comey and Trump?
Yeah, going back to President Trump's first time in office, Comey was one of the people who pushed back against a lot of ideas in that White House. He was one of the people who had questions about the Trump administration's handling of and the Trump campaign's handling of things going into the 2016 election. We should also remind our audience that Comey also came out and raised alarms about the Clinton campaign at the same time. We know that there are not these kind of similar investigations into anyone associated with that, but certainly there is just so much to kind of dig into with. It's certainly possible, Lindsey, just going back to what we saw last year, that these charges and this refocus on him could be a result of him getting a win in that case for the alleged lying to Congress that his attorneys have for now struck down in district court.
Okay, Jake, if you can hang out with us for a little bit, I do want to bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman, who is joining us on the phone. Katrina, I know that we haven't gotten our hands on the indictment yet, as far as I am aware, but what more can you tell us about this case?
Hi, Lindsey. Great to join you. I mean, something that is interesting about this is that, they are going after him over this seashell photo that had 8647, and this has real First Amendment implications. They're essentially arguing that this Instagram post constituted a true threat, and under that, the Supreme Court has found that someone has to understand that their message would be as threatening. It appears Comey actually took this down because he realized, or he expressed, that it had a different message than he claim that he intended. So this could also be very difficult for them to argue in court. But we are seeing this new tactic with the Comey indictment. I think it's also notable that there was just this 3rd attempted assassination of President Donald Trump, it appears, by Cole Allen. And now we see this indictment with a message that seems to indicate a threat to kill Donald Trump. So there does feel like a parallel a bit in the timing that they're choosing to bring this. It's a moment where President Trump has just gone through this experience, and now they want to try to go after Comey, saying that he, too, was threatening the president's life, Lindsey.
And since we don't have details yet on the charges or on exactly the details in the indictment, we don't have our hands on that paperwork yet. We are still, we've essentially confirmed this through sources and are still working to that. That said, will prosecutors, in your mind, have to prove intent, that Comey posted that with the intent of wanting harm to come to the president?
Very likely, yes. As you said, we haven't yet seen this. We don't yet know the charges. But if they are trying to, in fact, claim that this post constituted a true threat, then they absolutely have a high legal bar there to prove intent, to prove that Comey understood the meaning of this post, that he knew that it would be perceived as a threat to the president. We know that President Trump has been wanting to have Comey prosecuted over it. He claimed that it was a call for the assassination of the president. So, yes, there will be potentially a very high bar. But again, we will have to see what is actually in this indictment. What are the specific charges that they are going to bring?
And you said that there might be a parallel between the timing here of this indictment and what we saw come to pass Saturday night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, in which a man, as you mentioned, Cole Allen of California, is being charged with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. You were there. You were at the event. What more can you tell us about what you experienced then, and if you care to elaborate on why you think the timing may be crucial here?
Sure. Well, part of why I mentioned the timing is that in the aftermath of that alleged assassination attempt, I've been speaking with presidential scholars, and one of them noted that after an incident like this, a president or a person who has had an attempted assassination has some political capital, and they usually want to use it in a thoughtful way. This source had actually commented that they were surprised that President Trump wanted to use that capital on a ballroom, that they immediately sort of put out these filings saying that this is why we need a ballroom at the White House. But it feels notable to me that we are now seeing this indictment come out against James Comey, and our understanding is that it's related to this image that President Trump also had said was a call for him to be killed. And we know that James Comey is someone that President Trump has wanted to have gone after for a very long time. He wants to see him prosecuted. He wants to see him jailed. This is one of his perceived enemies, and we know that this is an issue that is very important to him. Lindsey, also notable that today a judge actually decided in the case of Maureen Comey, who had a lawsuit against the Department of Justice for her termination here in New York. A judge determined that she could move forward with that case. The DOJ had been trying to get that dismissed. So a lot of news related to the Comey family today.
Can you give us any more information on her case to remind folks what that's all about?
Yes, essentially what Maureen Comey is alleging is that she was fired because of her relation to her father, James Comey, or potentially because of her political affiliations, or she says both. She was let go from the Southern District of New York, where she had been a prosecutor. This occurred shortly after she had finished prosecuting the case against Sean Diddy Combs. I mean, it didn't seem to have any relation to how she did on that case. She was a highly respected prosecutor in SDNY, but she believes that this was wrongful termination. She is suing the Department of Justice, and as of today, that lawsuit can proceed.
Okay, Katrina Kaufman, hang out for us if you can. If we still have Jake Rosen, Department of Justice reporter. Jake, I wonder if there was anything that Katrina had mentioned that you would like to pull on.
Well, I think the one thing is that going back to September of last year, Lindsey, we saw that Truth Social post publicly addressed to then Attorney General Pam Bondi, ordering her to say that we, quote, can't delay any longer in the ongoing criminal investigations into people like James Comey, Senator Adam Schiff from California, and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Shortly after that, we kind of saw the movement against Comey and Letitia James in court. The case against Adam Schiff has not materialized to anything concrete as of now, but that is the world and landscape and political kind of echo chamber that this Department of Justice is functioning in, especially since Bondi's removal and the appointment of, we should point out to our audience, one of President Trump's former defense attorneys who was appointed to the second-in-command post at the Department of Justice, who is now leading the Department of Justice, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who has said in his first number of public addresses and press conferences since he's gotten this job that he is willing to go after and bring justice to those who he believes has not been brought yet. James Comey has been number one on that list, and certainly seems like today there's going to be another criminal development in this case.
So for anyone who is just joining us, it is 2:30 now Eastern Time, and we have been covering breaking news because we have confirmed, CBS News through sources, that former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted. This is a second case, separate from his first indictment, which was about allegedly lying to Congress regarding leaks to the press. This is about a post from last summer, May of 2025, excuse me, in which Comey had posted a picture of seashells on a beach that were in the shape of 8647. He posted on social media, excuse me. He immediately, well, I don't know how soon after he deleted it, but he posted that he didn't realize how it could be interpreted, that some might see it as a call to violence. But we know that shortly after that, many people in the president's sphere, including the president himself, did speak about how offended they were about it. A Secret Service spokesperson telling CBS News at the time, it vigorously investigates anything that can be taken as a potential threat, that they were aware of the social media post by the former FBI director, and they said they take this rhetoric very seriously. He said beyond that, we don't comment. At the time, then Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had confirmed Secret Service agents had interviewed Comey. FBI Director Kash Patel had said in a statement they were aware of it as well and were in communication with Secret Service. And the White House Deputy Chief of Staff had written in a social media post saying that his message can be clearly interpreted as a hit on the sitting president of the United States and is being taken seriously. But as we've been talking about with Jake Rosen and Katrina Kaufman, the president has long had James Comey in his sights, wanting him charged. That first indictment was dismissed. It is currently under appeal. And so, Jake Rosen, if you can remind us the status of that case for anyone who is just joining us, this first case involving alleged lying to Congress.
That's right, Lindsey. We saw after James Comey was charged and then indicted in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is just across the river in Alexandria last year, for these charges of allegedly leaking as part of a lying to Congress investigation. What was kind of at play here was vague wording in a single back and forth between a sitting senator and Comey about what he had apparently talked to a lawyer of his about, who was a friend of his and an intermediary between him and the media. The charges initially were hit with a number of motions to slow down this case. The first of which was that because of that True Social post that we just talked about a moment ago, Lindsey, that there was a selective and vindictive prosecution, that were it not for President Trump's message to Ban Bondi, were it not for hundreds of social media posts about and on Twitter and True Social aimed at James Comey, and were it not for the general animus that President Trump has had in campaign speeches, rallies, and as a sitting president against James Comey, that there would be no investigation and there would then be no indictment against him, and that typically somebody who had made a comment who maybe was not a former FBI director, who had been critical of the president, would never get charged in those instances. A judge heard arguments on that, but did not have to decide because a judge who was brought in from out of state to oversee this kind of argument actually ruled that the federal prosecutor, a former White House aide who was appointed temporarily to a job as a federal prosecutor, had been improperly and illegally appointed to that role. She was removed from that role eventually by the White House after the Department of Justice failed to secure an immediate stay of that order, and her time in that position timed out. Also, what timed out, Lindsey, is the actual statute of limitations on those charges. It was in around September of 2020 when that testimony was made. 5 years, if you kind of multiply that out, obviously was September of last year, days before those charges were brought. So typically how it would work is that this would get appealed. And unfortunately for us, just in the context of this, the appeals court has not set an argument there'll be an argument in a number of weeks on that discussion and whether the district court was right in dismissing those charges. But in the meanwhile, we have what was happened today, which is the indictment that our sources have confirmed to CBS News over these social media posts. We also know that there's an investigation in the Southern District of Florida into former Trump officials like James Comey, like former CIA Director John Brennan. And whether or not these charges result in anything, Lindsey, it's important to just remind our audience of what these charges are meant to do, even if there is no final criminal conviction at the end of the day. It is to force a former political and current political opponent, but a former political employee of President Trump who was fired in the midway through that first term to spend money on hiring lawyers to be dragged back into court. Every time we were in court with James to go to these proceedings, James Comey and his family were also in court, dealing with not just the media, but the constant re-criticism by the president and his allies in Department of Justice. It is to do what President Trump has alleged was done to him in the number of criminal investigations, both at a federal and state level. into him before he was reelected in 2024.
Incredible context there. Jake Rosen, thank you so much.